It is just 3:30 p.m. and it is July 16th, 2024. I'm going to call the meeting for the City of Iowa City Work Session to order. Welcome to everyone that is here virtually, and then to anyone that is here in the room. I want to make sure that Mayor Pro Tem, we can hear you and you can hear us.
I can hear you very well, Mayor.
Awesome. Welcome from Egypt. All right. We are going to move on to the first item on the agenda, City Hall and Public Safety Headquarters Space Need Study Update. I'm going to turn it over to our City Manager, Jeff Fruin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So it's been a few months since we last gave you an update on this project. As you recall, several months ago, we were really focused on evaluating the need. You all did some tours of the building, both the City Hall side and the police and fire side, and we generally talked to you about some of the challenges that we face, both with our current workspaces and projecting out the accommodation of our future growth. Since that time, we've been working on scenarios that will define how we take the next steps forward into thinking about our space needs for police, fire headquarters, and City Hall here. So I'm going to welcome OPN up to the microphone, and they're going to give you an update on the project.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Justin Bishop, partner with OPN Architects. Good to see you all again. And with me here is Sophie Donta, another architect who's been working on this that rounds out the rest of our team and others back in the office. So as Jeff said, today we wanted to sort of recap where we've been and what we've been working on, but really focus on design scenarios and those associated costs that might be with that. So that's what we're going to get into today. Just checking my slides here. So as a reminder, last time we left, like Jeff said, we were wrapping up that data collection phase. We had done the building assessments, user interviews, building tours, a lot of sort of background work to inform the decisions that are made in the concept phase. And so that was really thinking about what we have currently and our existing conditions, and then what do we need in the future to support operations of the City Hall, fire, and police. So you all got the behind-the-scenes tour in sort of the nooks and crannies of some of the spaces here, thinking about sort of the basic needs of a proper office space or workspaces, thinking about access to daylight, just sort of the quality of space that people are working in, but then also the support of the infrastructure and the systems that are needed to keep the building operational long-term. And then these are the words that we heard really in the staff and the steering committee's sort of priorities and different themes that could be driven into future design iterations and solutions. I'm not going to read each one line by line, but there's a lot of aspirational things here. I think it's not just a square footage sort of conversation, but really about doing the right thing for all the employees and the people that are working here. And when you sort of put some of these responses of the surveys into that sort of Wordle diagram, you can see the biggest ones were the most obvious, that were the most reoccurring, with more space and growth for future, more privacy, and then basic things like restrooms and a break area. So I think there's pretty expected sort of solutions, but these are all pretty basic needs too. There's nothing extravagant here. You know, we're not looking for anything over the top. It's really about modernizing to what we would think of as a current standard. And again, not new information here. This is the same slide that we presented last time, but you see the square footage. The different colors represent the different blocks of program. The green is office for the City Hall, blue is police, and red is fire. So currently the top bar, there's about 65,600 square feet, gross square feet total among those three different blocks of program. And through our surveys and investigations, we're projecting 119,000 square feet total would be needed to meet the future needs. So again, not new information, but sort of resetting the context of where we've been and where we're going. And this kind of falls in line with the overall timeline of the building. If you think back in the early 60s when the first couple pieces of this building were built, it's been a cadence of about every 30 years. And we're at another 30-year milestone here for another rather significant investment as an opportunity to think about the future. So from the 60s to the 90s, it almost doubled in square footage. And you can imagine the growth that's happened in the city and all the operations that have evolved that gets you to the 119,000 square feet too. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sophie and she'll walk us through some of the rest of the content here.
Yeah, So after we sort of determined space needs, the next piece was, how does a built solution come into play, and what do the different sort of plan options look like for this? So we started with program, basically who would stay on this site. Everybody, nobody, or a combination of functions, and pretty quickly identified that nobody moving off-site, having a full fire station, police station, and city hall of adequate size on this site was not going to happen, was not a feasible thing. Everything gets very vertical, and just the logistics of getting fire trucks and people and everyone into the site does not work anymore. And then the other one that was kind of ruled out as we went through with city staff and the steering committee was City Hall physically moving off-site. And so with the options remaining, we're looking at police moving off-site. In both scenarios, they were identified as the department that did not really need to be headquartered downtown. And then either having City Hall and fire remain, or fire looking for another site downtown for fire station number 1. So as I said, we sort of started with site constraints. This is the existing site, the existing building. One thing that was identified for the fire station needs was to have, so most modern fire stations, you can drive the truck in from both sides. Just from an operations standpoint, then you don't end up with vehicles double parked and having to do this sort of arrangement to get people out in a timely manner. And so that red bar represents basically how you could accommodate a full drive-through for fire vehicles on this site. And then the blue line is the floodplain. And so these were the kind of two things we were working with as site constraints as we were looking at these options as well. Some of the baselines that we decided were goals for all of the options. Again, the police would move off-site, that of the 3 functions, that is the one that could easiest move off-site and needs the least connection to the other 2. The west side of the building should not be reused. The current fire and police side was in poor condition, is having some maintenance issues, structural issues, as well as it's just either 1 or 2 stories. It's not making the best use of that site. And so keeping and remodeling that end was also ruled out. Again, fire station number 1, having modern dual entry drives, improving operational efficiency and response times in that fire station was also identified as a priority. New larger council chambers, replacing all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems with more sustainable functional systems than what you currently have, and then simplifying circulation and all the level changes throughout the building for accessibility, and minimizing program in the floodplain. So I'm not going to go through all these, but just to say we went through many, many options, looking at this in a variety of ways, exploring who moves off-site, what do the sizes look like, how does this work from a building and site perspective. And in the end, we ended up with 2 sort of preferred options that we then sent out for a cost estimate. These 2 options, one would be total replacement, and so basically in order to fit that modern functional fire station on site, as well as a city hall, you would completely replace this building, start from scratch on this site. Or option 2, and this is going to be the preferred option, we decided working towards it, was that you would move fire station number 1 and police headquarters off-site, and then build an addition to City Hall on the west side that was more modern office space and larger council chambers. And so I'll go through option 1 just quickly. So this is kind of what a site plan would look like. For phasing, first you would move police off-site, either to the former transit site or another site. You would then have temp space for City Hall employees as well as council chambers during that time. You could then demolish the east half of the building, build a fire station, demolish the west half of the building, build a City Hall. And this is kind of a very rough sketch what that massing ends up looking like, both buildings on site with the necessary fire drives. And some considerations for this one, by starting from scratch, you can basically try to solve most of the issues related to floodplain and level changes, and you're not needing to acquire a new site. But there's some significant downsides. The fire station just still isn't really ideal. It ends up 3 stories. The vertical nature isn't good for response times either if you're sleeping 2 levels above your truck. And the site plan really is completely driven by getting the trucks in and out. And so the massing of the City Hall and how that all works is driven by fire trucks rather than what would be best for employees, what's best for daylighting, what's best for the people coming in. There's not a lot of room for future expansion, trying to put both of these programs on site, unless you were, again, to go more vertical in the future. And then the total demolition of the whole building, you know, it has character impacts. We lose this room, we lose the history with that, we lose the original plan, and also the embodied carbon footprint that comes with demolishing a building and starting completely over. And then, as we'll see toward the end, I'll go through the cost estimate for both. It is a higher cost per square foot for this option. And so the preferred option we landed on was option 2, where police and fire are both finding new homes, new modern facilities and sites that are more well-suited. And we are taking down the public safety half of this building and building up. It would be a 3-story office and council addition, and that would include shell space, so room for future growth even beyond this study. And so with this one, again, you'd start with, and it could go in any order, police or fire, buildings, identifying sites, and moving off-site. You would still need temp space, but for less time, as they did the renovation of this half of the building. And then you would do the addition onto the west side after that. Oops. And this is kind of a rough sketch of what that ends up looking like. Everything kind of to the right side of the U is what's existing, and it would be kind of a U-shaped addition. So you get a courtyard in the middle. Everyone gets windows and access to natural light, and then you also get outdoor space adjacent to council chambers. So for city events, public events, things like that, you have that indoor-outdoor space. And so with this one, fire station number 1 can really be built at the usual 1 to 2 story scale on a site that accommodates the drives and can just plan that out. You know, if you're going to invest in a new fire station, do it right and do it in a way that functions for them on a site that's ideal for that. The outdoor courtyard space is a plus, the sort of donut-shaped circulation for wayfinding, but also for natural light. There's room for growth. This option and the cost estimate includes shell space for future growth, or potentially moving departments that are off-site back into City Hall. Preserves the original character of this half of the building, at least, and then lower cost per square foot. But in keeping this half of the building, which is kind of the nicer, higher quality office space, there are some issues that remain. There are some lower level uses in the floodplain on this half of the building. This half of the building will still be split level. It would only be the one section. The rest, the floors would all line up, but you would have, you know, the elevator as it is to get you up and down in this side of the building. And then sustainability improvements to the envelope could be part of this too. And so replacing glass, things like that, to bring the exterior of this more in line with the new building as well. And so going through the cost estimate, so just to go through what it does include, what it doesn't include. What it does include are direct costs. That's basically construction costs, cost of the building itself. Some indirect costs, so contingencies, contractors' fees, insurance, permits, and then furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So this would include furniture, fixtures, things like that for these as well. Pricing would not include rent or fit-out costs on temporary space. Escalation, so if this is built today, this is the price. If this is built 20 years from now, 10 years from now, the price can change. Financing costs, professional fees, so that'd be architecture, engineering. Additional site acquisition for fire is an unknown. But then on the other side, this doesn't include any of the potential credits, incentives, rebates for electrification or sustainability upgrades, things that could be in the Inflation Reduction Act or other incentives could actually bring this number down. And so, you know, these are really broad numbers at this point. We're basically taking the program that we worked through with staff, we're taking the square footage, and that's what the cost estimator is estimating off of. You know, it's not a design building, it's basically saying this much fire station or this much office space at this level of quality. So option 1, this is the total building replacement, plus an additional police facility. This comes out to approximately $97 million. This would be the cost of demolition and essentially 3 new buildings, 2 of them on the same site. Option 2 actually came out right around the same. Again, cost of 2 new buildings, and then in this one, renovation and substantial addition, including the demolition of the west half. And just to go to this comparison quick, you can see the estimates came out about the same, but you are getting more square footage for about the same amount of money with the renovation and addition concept. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, but I know those, we went quick, and those are scary numbers. I know they're scary numbers. But you have to picture, this is 3 buildings to a high-quality standard and high sustainability standard. And also, the cost of doing nothing is not zero. There are maintenance issues already. You will have to continue maintaining these buildings, and also as staff grows, finding places for those staff to be. And so as you look at these numbers, try not to compare them in your head to a zero, but more what is the cost of just business as usual versus what's the investment we need to start making at this point.
Yeah, thank you. So I appreciate what you're saying, but the cost of inaction is not zero, right? We're spending money to repair the apparatus bay floor now. You can see that work happening. Your agenda tonight includes the process to replace the roof here, a partial roof here, and we'll continue to have those I would say fairly small scale projects that add up over time. So in any given year, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in just pretty much patching or extending the life of what we have. So I appreciate your willingness to engage in this. And what I'd like to do tonight is allow you to ask any questions, clarify, think about the scenarios that are presented. And then as you wrap up that discussion, I'd like to talk about next steps, depending on kind of how your conversation goes and how I see us moving not only to final report here, but beyond final report so we can keep some of this momentum going. But for now, I think it's important that you just have time to ask questions and engage our team here.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions asked about what was presented, but I have an initial question relating to the fire department because proximity, I thought I understood that this was a ideal place. So Chief Lyon, if you can kind of speak to us on that. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Council. Scott Lyon, Fire Chief, Iowa City. Downtown is an optimal location. I think that given the constraints of what we're dealing with, that we can expand our circle just a little bit outside of the immediate downtown area, maybe Johnson Street over to the east of here, maybe Market Street on the north side, somewhere in that general vicinity. We could certainly still make things work. So I don't believe that we have to necessarily be here on this site.
Okay.
And certainly acquisition is going to be challenging in the downtown area, but we think it's worth exploring, and that's one of those steps I'll talk to you about at the end, because if we do believe in this and this is the path we want to go, it's obviously staff's recommendation, we need to be thinking about acquisition even though Fire Station 1 may not be tomorrow's project or the top priority tomorrow. We need to be thinking a few years ahead and securing property as quickly as possible.
Would
Any
like
other
to ask
questions?
questions. Oh, go ahead. I
Go ahead,
would
sir.
like to ask questions. I don't know who this is for, but order of operations this seems like we're very much looking at 3 separate projects, even though they're all connected at the hip: police, fire, city hall. Police and fire, from what I heard, appear to be the building components that serve us the worst and are in the worst parts of the building, so are probably first. Is that kind of the direction that I understand correctly? And then between police and fire, like, how do we make that? And you're standing at the podium, so I know what you'll say, but I am curious about like how we think about this thing that's huge.
Yeah, in my mind, in my mind, the needs of the police department are the most acute. We have to address those first, and I see that as the first moving piece here. Fire would be second, could be simultaneous, but would also be second, and then. City Hall, it's not that the needs don't exist, but I don't think they're as of high priority. We have some greater flexibility, and whether it's remote work or securing off-site office space, that's always an option, is that we lease space or we buy, a swing space off-site, and we can accommodate that a little bit easier. It's not easy to do a second police location or a second fire, headquarters. those kind of need to move as one big group. But City Hall, we've got a few more options on how we can manage that growth while the other two projects move forward.
I was also curious about opportunities for these buildings to collaborate. I know that the county just received their report on the jail and their needs. Are there opportunities for police or fire or city hall to collaborate with other public entities or private entities?
Absolutely. From the law enforcement standpoint, that would be one of my recommendations for next steps, is that we approach the county and explore their desire to kind of walk down the path of looking at a joint facility with us. I don't think the county or the city is in a position to say, yes, that needs to be done. That is the answer. But there's definitely efficiencies that need to be explored, particularly thinking about the taxpayers and paying for two public safety buildings of significant size. I think we really need to look at what that option looks like if we plan that and work together. So that would be one of my recommended next steps. From a fire and city hall standpoint, is not as maybe not as obvious, but we would absolutely look at partnerships with other, particularly other public agencies, if those presented themselves.
Can you just speak to how you arrived at these very ballpark numbers in terms of, the city hall side, we got just a little more detail. The fire and police, you have specific numbers for the new construction with just, squares on the screen. So can you just speak a little bit to the methodology for coming up with those estimates?
Yeah, so we had DCI Group Professional Cost Estimator look at this, and basically what we gave them was the square footage and then the list of spaces, and they're looking at comparable projects at this point. They're looking at, in terms of systems, city sustainability goals being met, the quality of construction in line with what we'd be used to in the region. But they're basically looking at comparable projects in history to get those numbers. There's not a building designed at this point. It's purely, a fire station or a police station of this quality and this size. So they're broad numbers at this point.
And the $700 to $800+ a square foot, can you or staff just give us a sense of where that lands in comparison to other types of buildings?
Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a range of how much things cost. Your high end would be really specialized, so labs, hospitals, things like that. Public safety is kind of in the middle. Mm-hmm. There are some specialized spaces. Your office space is sort of toward the lower end of just open, mm-hmm. Medium end finishes. So public safety, I'd say, is in the middle there. It's not the least expensive, but it's not your absolute highest dollar space. It's going to be more than a city hall, though, per square foot. Absolutely.
Sure.
This might be a little bit more in the weeds than the questions that have come before, but I still think it's high level. You had noted about the lack of desirability of the west side for fire and for police because it's in the floodplain, right? But I did see that the recommendations for the additions, mm-hmm. that City Hall would be right up in the floodplain.
So it's the other way. Sorry if that line wasn't clear. We are in the floodplain.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's downhill toward the
Gotcha.
east.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
So leaving this building would leave it in
Right.
the floodplain. Most of this site is technically in the floodplain.
Okay. Thank you. I just
yeah.
misaligned myself. Thank you.
Yep.
And that's one of the things. So if you go back to that slide with the
Mm-hmm.
line, right now our public safety agencies are technically out of the floodplain
Okay.
where police and fire are located. As we looked at scenarios that kept either police on or fire in, you really don't have a whole lot of options but to move them either all or partially in the floodplain. Having City Hall in the floodplain is not ideal, but it's manageable.
Right.
When your public safety first responders are in a floodplain, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the main reasons, as we projected the growth in square footage, that we just couldn't find a scenario in which either one was going to best serve the public on this site.
Was parking in the temporary block designs, was parking also, I just wanted to maybe hear a little bit about the parking and how that will play out.
So it was considered, as we looked at some of these, that would, fill in the entire site. Having no parking on site was seen as undesirable. Increasing the amount of parking on site was determined to be not a priority. There were options that was parking garage with building above or things like that. And the determination was, keep some as existing, but not to prioritize parking as we have limited site area over building out space.
One thing to keep in mind with the parking, Mayor, if police, largely the first floor of Augusta Place, that has a parking lot, and we own the first level of parking. Kind of think of it as a condo regime there. So I don't recall the number of spaces. I'm guessing 70, 80 spaces or so are mostly used by police, but a little bit fire too. So as those move off-site and City Hall uses would be able to take that Augusta Place parking. And while we certainly are further in the weeds now than we really got, we would try to move our city vehicles. We have a lot of city vehicles parked in Chauncey. I guess I'm pointing the wrong way, in the Chauncey Swan deck, that we would probably move into Augusta to free up more public space and more space for future employees that would remain on this campus.
I actually have one question to circle back to the path that you want to recommend, and that I know Councilor Moe talked about with potential collaborations with the county. Right now, the idea would be that sort of that conversation can be fully open as to possibilities or not, whatever. I mean, but to have that conversation, number one, but it wouldn't be tied in advance of the conversation to say, hey, this is about the police department or this is about fire. I mean, since the county also has, significant control and oversight over EMT, I'm wondering, the conversation is wide open, in other words, about what a path forward, if there's a path forward, would be, or is there already some inkling of like, well, it might make the most sense for talking about how the sheriff and the police might collaborate? I don't know. I guess I'm just asking, have any parameters been set about that conversation yet? Or is it really like, let's talk about needs, let's talk about possibilities?
Yeah, I would say no parameters have been set. We really haven't. Informally, we've talked about it with Sheriff Kunkel, knowing that we could end up in this scenario. But really beyond that, we haven't engaged the county in detailed discussions. The one thing I would say when it comes to moving police off-site, we don't envision police staying downtown. So incorporating fire into that scenario, at least replacing fire headquarters in that scenario probably would not make sense. Now, if we build out, say, near the airport, would we absolutely engage the fire department to say, hey, is there space that we should be thinking of due to the proximity to the airport, which I think the fire department would probably be interested in at least having those discussions. And we would welcome any other uses based, whether it's Johnson County Ambulance or anything else that the county's identified as a priority, and looking at that as well. The site that was shown is the former, or the old, what we call the old Public Works campus. We'd like to evaluate whether that site works. It does work for a standalone police department, and that was part of this exercise. As we bring the county in, if we go down that path and we look at the sheriff's office needs, I'm not sure if that Riverside property still works, but what that next step would tell us is basically give us some site constraints to say, okay, this site would work or this site wouldn't work. And if you want to look at alternative locations, you're going to need X amount of acreage. So that we can jointly look at land acquisition if that's indeed the path that we end at. But for me, the biggest reason to work collaboratively with the sheriff's office is really just, again, thinking about the taxpayer expense of building two standalone facilities. And I think we need to be able to talk about this is the cost of what the sheriff's office is looking at. This is the cost of what the police looks at if we're pursuing separate, and what efficiencies are there. I can't tell you that right now. I don't know how meaningful those efficiencies would be, but I suspect that there are a lot of cost savings to be looked at, and frankly, operational efficiencies that may serve Iowa City and Johnson County well into the future.
Thanks. Mayor Pro Tem's hand is up.
Oh, yes. Mayor Pro Tem?
No, that was long time ago, but I think so. Our city manager answered my questions while he was talking, because I was trying to see what's the plan for the employees and how they're gonna work while the construction on. But while we're here, I guess also I can ask another question. I was trying to see if there is a possibility of a small office for city council, and so we can have our mail there and we can come and find a quiet space to answer questions and send emails, just sitting there. Well, did you consider something like that for city council?
Yeah, we certainly could. I can't remember if that was factored into the square footage or not of city council offices. There actually used to be a city council office in this building. Unfortunately, as staff needs grew, we ended up sacrificing the council office for a growth in our finance department. So, Mayor Pro Tem, I think absolutely we could explore that space. I know the mayor is often asked to entertain groups that come through here at City Hall, and this space is often used. It's less than ideal, and we would look at those types of kind of flexible spaces for meetings as well.
No, of course, the space was great for public meeting, even with I attend many meetings with the mayor here. But what I mean, where we can have our meals, not area we can see a public art, area we can be a workstation or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, but if we cannot fit, of course, the employees have the priority. And after that, you can think about us.
Yeah. And Mayor Pro Tem, just feel free to jump in whenever. I do have the iPad in front of me now, and I'll be looking at it.
No problem. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I would echo the need for council to have dedicated space, office space.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about the decision-making to recommend saving portions of the building, this building here, just to sort of talk that out as far as the historic integrity and history of this space and its value as a structure and how that process happened. I think there's some cool parts of the building, but it also has some pretty serious deficiencies. So can you talk through that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So we looked at both, and that was kind of, runner-up option was full replacement. There were a couple reasons. One, as office space, this wing is frankly pretty nice. It's a usable office space. The structure's pretty open. It's more flexible. There aren't bearing walls in weird places. The proportions were right. It was designed as office space, and using it as office space continues to work. It gets natural light. It doesn't have a lot of the sort of deficiencies that the west half has. And then the other sort of arguments were, one, just both the environmental, the carbon savings, and the cost savings of keeping half of the building intact, particularly the 90s infill, that's not that old and in relatively good shape. But then also just sort of, the more sentimental aspect of keeping the original entry and the original sort of part of the original design, and keeping what's added, even though it's a higher scale, kind of in line with that original design.
Thanks.
This was kind of implied, but just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. The office space that we have now in the basement is the opposite of what you just described, lack
Yes.
of light and everything else.
Yes.
Would all of that office space be repurposed to storage? I mean, would there still be
Yes.
any sort of anybody relegated to the basement in this option two, I guess is what I'm asking.
The sort of, I guess I'd call it half basement directly below us by the perimeter with the windows would continue to be office space, or that could be shell. You could use that last. In this option, there is extra space to decide where people go day one. All the windowless basement, it would be storage. In this option, everyone has access to daylight, at least indirectly, at least through an open office scenario.
In talking about that part of the city hall being in the floodplain, two questions. One, I don't know that you'd be able to answer, but I'm just curious if it's ever flooded because of that in its history. And second, if there are, in this design, any sort of mitigation components for stuff that's stored down there. We certainly, better than flooding out people's offices, but we certainly probably wouldn't want to have important records and documents destroyed either.
Yeah, so we haven't gotten quite into that level of detail yet, but the assumption would be, off the ground, resilient surfaces that we'd kind of design around the fact that it would very rarely possibly flood. And again, that's why you sort of minimize people down there, but any important documents, yeah, you could store above the ground or work with things like that. But the thought is that we wouldn't put vital building systems in the floodplain, or anything that couldn't be moved with enough notice. And definitely not people in the windowless basement anymore.
And I know one of the other things when we did the tour was looking at the problems with like the HVAC system and the different inefficient zones. Would this, by keeping this half of the facility, would we still be tied to some of those same problems? Or is the redesign option two, does that take that, and are we going to improve some of those problems, even though we'll be sticking with the same basic floor plan and
Yep.
layout?
All the MEP systems would be total replacement in both options. So we'd be keeping the structure, basically, and potentially the envelope. So like the exterior and the structure.
I guess, sorry, my question was like, does that envelope and structure limit the ability to fix the problems that are currently had with the current MEB, I think you called it?
Structure, no. Envelope could be more efficient than it is, but it's more of, I think, the building hitting capacity at this point of systems and length of runs and kind of being tacked into over time was the sense we got from the engineers that a systems replacement could be effective.
Thank you. Oh, does anybody know if this is ever flooded down the lower level?
I'm looking at Ron. He might have the most history here. Do you recall any? Not to our knowledge in recent history.
Thank you.
I'm aware that I think we've gotten water in the basement, but is that what you're asking, or do you mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, both water in the basement, but also has the creek flooding. And since your office is down there, you might be.
I have a special interest.
Yeah, you might have special interest in this.
Yes.
Ron Konecki, Public Works Director. Prior to the Ralston Creek flood improvements, so the Scott Park Basin and the North Branch Basin, I would say that it definitely flooded. But since those improvements, I think there's been some mitigation there that's helped reduce that potential impact. Not saying that it can't happen, but I'm not aware in my time here of us having that issue. Obviously, there are the flood doors, and there's been some flood mitigation in the basement space to be prepared if that would occur, but I'm not aware of my time of having that issue.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question for Ron, actually, since he's up there. A lot of the design seems to be predicated on the floodplain and avoiding that. Are there plans or opportunities to further mitigate problems with Ralston Creek to make this full site more utilizable?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I was just going to add, certainly, well, we haven't seen the flood waters, other than flash floods, which we've struggled with at times. Certainly our friends across the street at New Pie have had their share of water problems from the creek. So while we haven't experienced it, it's not too far off. And given the intensity of the change in storms, if we think out the next 30 years, we should probably know that it's a realistic scenario that we would face some flooding challenges, even if we hadn't in the last several decades.
Thank you.
Jeff, you just mentioned the next 30 years, and Justin, in your part of the presentation, you kind of showed the every 30-year renovations, replacements. Is that the scope of what we're talking about for City Hall and also for the other two buildings? Were you imagining like a 30-year usable life? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be a great goal. I think anything from a programmatic standpoint gets hard to plan for that long. But if we have the flexibility and the adaptability of the building as departments shrink and grow, I think that's a reasonable expectation. Like we would want to design a 30 or 50-year building, you know, from a maintenance standpoint for sure.
With adding on to that question, the current building, since in this proposal it'll be saved, can we build up on this building if ever that need arose
In the future, you mean, or of this
in the
building?
future?
Maybe. That's always really challenging to build over occupied spaces and logistics and things like that. It's not out of the realm, but Ron might have some ideas.
When we added the third floor for the engineering space, that maxed that part of the building out. So we can't build any higher in that area. Obviously, we're talking about demoing the other half. So we're maxed out on space in regards to ability to move up without having some major structural improvements at the lower levels.
And what was planned for that last level addition is something that we could think about for this if it's a future addition here as well. So it's not easy to do, but it's definitely something we can plan for. And I think that extra elbow room or sort of future growth is key to any successful plan here. So.
Any other questions by council?
I think the city manager was going to talk to us about next steps.
Yeah, so next steps, OPN is, you see the red arrow is not quite to that final report. We wanted to hear some of this conversation before we closed out this phase of the project. And there's really three recommendations in terms of moving forward for you tonight. One is that I have your consensus to approach the county and kind of to your point, Megan, explore what they might be interested in looking at, right? We're not necessarily limiting it just to the sheriff's office, but certainly our priority right now is exploring that partnership between the sheriff's office and police, and we welcome any other needs that the county's identified. That would be the first recommendation, is that you give me the go-ahead to pursue that engagement. Second would be for us to start looking for possibilities for Fire Station 1. Again, it's not necessarily an urgent need, but we need to be on the lookout, and we need to be mindful that those opportunities could come up in the next several months, the next several years. With your permission, I'd like to add that to our focus list for this project. And then the second piece we didn't spend a whole lot of time on, but really through these scenarios, what we've determined with OPN is that we may need about 25,000 to 30,000 square feet of swing space. Meaning as the puzzle pieces move, as we pursue any of these, we could need off-site office space to accommodate us on a temporary basis, and we need to be thinking about that. So we need to be thinking about what those opportunities look like, and that may mean temporarily leasing space. Frankly, it means thinking about the RFP that we're going through at 21 South Lynn and asking ourselves, at least, should we be thinking about some office space there, knowing that we're going to be having some swing space needs in the next 10 to 20 years. I need to give that some more thought, but we need to be anticipating that, because there's not a whole lot of room left to grow. As an example, currently in engineering up on the third floor there, we're looking at spending several $100,000 to retrofit that space to add a couple more offices, really, as that department continues to grow. So with City Hall being that third piece of the puzzle, I think we're going to have to seriously consider looking at some off-site leases, or at least some opportunities to house departments off-site until we could complete all of the projects that are articulated in this study. So those are the three things: collaboration with the county, looking at Fire Station 1 acquisition needs, and starting to evaluate swing space opportunities.
With the swing space, is that beholden to being in this general vicinity of downtown, or can you expand that search? I know that, like you say.
Yeah, I don't think we're beholden to the downtown there. I personally, I like the idea
of
of City Hall and public employees being downtown. I think there's a lot of benefits to that, but we also have to recognize if we're viewing it as maybe temporary needs, that there may be some existing opportunities elsewhere in the community. So I wouldn't limit it to downtown, but I wouldn't want to exclude that either.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Speaking of steps forward, it'd probably be good to mention what kind of time frame we're talking about for this whole thing, lest anybody think we're talking about making a decision in the next month.
Yeah, so from the police standpoint, really it's going to take a few months, probably engaging the county and just what does this next step look like? And then you're talking about engaging some professional services, and you're talking several months worth of study. So, we could be 6 months to 12 months out from having a conversation with you about what we learned through the exploration of a joint facility. We don't have funding sources identified. I wish I had $97 million right now that I could recommend to move forward on all these pieces, but I think at this point, you should plan on at least another 6 to 12 months of study and engagement on the county and police side.
And that would be step one.
That would be step one, yeah. Fire station acquisition, again, we would look at right away, but I wouldn't expect that a solution's magically going to appear in the next few months.
But we're not rushing into a purchase, is I guess the point I'm making sure everybody understands.
There's no, we're not rushing into any expense other than perhaps another professional services contract comparable to what we've just engaged OPN with this study.
Can you, on your question 2, fire station land acquisition, can you talk through any recent examples of where we located a new fire station close to a residential neighborhood that hadn't been there before? I'm just thinking of, we need a downtown fire station. If it's replaced where it is, we can simply say it's always been there. But if we're looking for a new site, I can imagine there's going to be challenges. Can you talk through any previous examples of that happening?
Well, our last fire station was 4, and that we
That's-
opened in 2010, 2011, somewhere in that ballpark, and that's really not directly adjacent to residential. That's out on North Dodge Street and Scott Boulevard. Certainly with Fire Station 1, while this has been here for a while, Augusta Place was just built, so the reverse scenario in which we've had a lot of residential built around that. I struggle to think of other examples. We went through certainly a remodel of Station 2, but nothing new.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're right to identify that concern and that sensitivity to identifying a location.
I think the other thing, I would just mention is, while things are being explored and talked about, there could be an opportunity that the council may need to at least learn about of an acquisition or something like that. So I just mentioned that for the public. Of course, those will be in executive session. That there could be an opportunity that does come up that we would have to move on relatively quickly. So just want to get a consensus if folks are okay giving permission to the city manager to do the 3 things that was stated. Okay. All right. So you're good to go.
Thank you.
Great. We're going to move on to item number. Thanks to you all for coming and doing this. Thanks to the city manager and all the individuals that was involved in kind of helping this move along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item number 2, which is review preliminary study and recommendation on Dodge and Governor two-way street conversion. And we're going to start with.
Aline from our engineering department is going to introduce the project, and then we'll turn it over to our consultants on the project, Strand Associates, for the presentation.
Awesome. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Aline Danaki. I'm a senior engineer in the Public Works Department. and future project engineer for Dodge Street reconstruction project.
You could just pull the mic up a little bit, Aline, thank you.
This afternoon, I will introduce you Jeff Held with Strand and Associates to present you Dodge and Governor one-way to two-way conversion study.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, thank you. Thanks for having me. Again, Jeff Held with Strand Associates, and I'm the project manager for this one-way to two-way conversion study. Also the functional design, which was a very preliminary design of the Dodge Street reconstruction. And Josh Straka is with me today, also from Strand. He'd be the project manager for the upcoming reconstruction of Dodge Street, the design of it, the consultant project manager. So today we'll talk about kind of an introduction and a background to the two-way conversion study. We'll look at some data along Dodge Street and Governor Street. There are jurisdictional implications associated with these streets because they are Iowa State Highway 1. We'll talk about some costs and impacts of possible two-way conversion, and then have time for questions as well. So to provide a project introduction and background, we've been studying the Dodge and Governor two-way conversion. It is in the current strategic plan for the city. Currently, they are Iowa State Route 1, and they are owned and maintained by Iowa DOT. And our study corridor runs from Burlington Street on the south up to where Dodge and Governor meet on the north end. There is a reconstruction project that is planned, and it does need to move into design fairly soon for planned reconstruction to begin in late 2026. It is an existing one-way pair, and so Dodge Street has two travel lanes southbound with a bike lane on the right-hand side. Governor Street has 2 lanes northbound with a bike lane also on the right-hand side. And typically when communities are looking to convert one-way pairs, it's often for one of the reasons here. Sometimes the volumes on these streets no longer suggest that they need to be a one-way pair. The volumes have dropped. Oftentimes, a two-way operation can reduce speeds and provide a better environment for pedestrians and bicyclists. It can decrease the barrier effect of a one-way street. Sometimes there's a goal to improve safety with these two-way conversions, and in some cases, the hope is to spur economic growth or redevelopment. We'll kind of walk through each of these points and how they relate to Dodge and Governor. So starting with the data review, the current traffic volumes out there provided by Iowa DOT, Dodge Street carries about 6,000 to 8,000 vehicles per day, and Governor is about 4,000 to 6,000 using round numbers. So if you combine those together, you're looking at kind of 9,000 to 15,000 vehicles per day total. If they were to be converted to two-way operation, one of the two would remain as Iowa State Route 1, and likely we anticipate that that would probably be Dodge Street. It's just a little bit more of a direct connection. And if we assume that about 80% of the existing traffic would then use Dodge Street because it's signed as Iowa 1 and it's kind of the main route, and 20% would remain on Governor, we end up with about 8,000 to 12,000 vehicles per day on Dodge Street. So that's an increase. And then Governor Street would drop down to about 2,000 to 3,000 vehicles per day. So the volumes after conversion suggest Dodge Street, we need to consider probably a center left turn lane along the route. That's the 12,000 to 15,000 vehicle per day range is kind of where left turn lanes are needed at intersections. And because of the closely spaced intersections as well as the alleys in between the intersections, it's likely you'd need a continuous left turn lane along the route. So you're talking about widening the street. Governor Street, the signalized intersections could likely be replaced with stop control because of the volume drop. So that's another consequence of potentially converting to two-way. And then the intersection at the north end where Dodge and Governor meet would need to be reconfigured in some way as well if it were two-way. So looking at the typical section or sort of the dimensions of the roadway, this is both the existing condition as well as the proposed if it were to remain as one-way. There's about 33 feet from the back of the curb to the back of the curb. That's the total street width. The parkway area behind the curbs, it varies quite a bit, and it kind of depends on where the sidewalk is along the corridor. But it's generally about 6 feet to 17 feet, and that's the area where you'll have your signs and trees and things like that behind the curb. And so if it were to be converted to a two-way condition and it were determined that we needed that center left turn lane, which our initial review suggests we probably would, we're looking at widening to provide a 14-foot center turn lane. That's the typical width. So it's going to be about a 20-foot wider street. There are implications for trees along the route. We roughly counted up the number of trees. 40 to 45 trees on each side are within that area that would need to be expanded. So that's one of the consequences of potentially going to two-way. If we look at some examples of how that would look, we've got a couple of them here. This is on Dodge Street, south of Bloomington. On the left-hand side is the aerial view. The orange is the existing footprint, and the yellow shows that additional widening that might occur. And then there's kind of a view looking down the street as well. So you get a little bit of a sense for what lies within that yellow area that would be the wider street. In this example, there's a couple of signs, and there's a power pole. Another example. What happened there? So this one is south of Ronald Street. And in this example, on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a few trees that are within that parkway area that would be where the street would be widened. So just to give you a sense for what that would look like. Another of the reasons to consider two-way conversion is travel speeds for motor vehicles, and as well as the pedestrian and bike environment. There were speed feedback signs that were added at the bottom of the hill on Dodge Street near Brown Street. Anecdotally, these do seem to have helped reduce the speeds along Dodge Street. There's pedestrian, or as far as pedestrian conditions, there is sidewalk on both sides today, as well as some high visibility crosswalks at the higher volume crossings. And for bicyclists, there is a buffered bike lane, so there's a little bit of a buffer provided southbound on Dodge Street that was added in 2018 per the MPO and city bike plans. So the facilities are there today for bicycles and pedestrians as far as the bike and pedestrian environment goes. From a safety standpoint, another reason that sometimes two-way conversion is considered, based on the MPO's urbanized area collision analysis, the analysis ranks intersections and roadway lengths based on crash rate, the severity, and the total number of collisions all around Iowa City and the metro area. That report has 213 intersections that were considered and 77 sections of roadway. As far as where Dodge and Governor ranked, there's only 3 intersections within the top 60. You can see 2 of them there are on Dodge Street at Burlington and at Washington, and one was on Governor at Jefferson. And neither of those corridors had any of the street sections between intersections that ranked in the top 77. So there's not a notable crash history out there, at least as far as the records are showing. And then on the economic development and redevelopment side of things, we did a literature review, and there's a number of studies that have been done to recommend either conversion or maintaining one-way. They typically don't quantify the amount or the rate of development or redevelopment that happened after two-way conversion. It's rare that communities look back and try to quantify that. The increases in economic development are generally predicted due to better pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. In this case, the accommodations are pretty good. Also, parking is usually a factor in these studies. With both corridors currently do not have parking, so that's less of a factor in these situations, and we don't expect that Dodge Street would have parking added, even if it were converted to two-way. Dodge and Governor, yeah, as I note there's reasonable bike accommodations already. Don't plan to add parking. And it's also notable that these are predominantly residential corridors. A lot of the corridors that are converted, so Cedar Rapids has done a lot of this, Des Moines has done a lot of this. They tend to be more in their downtown areas, and that's more the traditional condition where a lot of these were converted to one-way pairs back in the 60s. For many downtowns, the volumes have dropped since then, and there's just not really a need for this one-way operation anymore. And so especially in Cedar Rapids, that's been part of what's driven their conversions. But again, it's kind of a downtown commercial corridor, and these are a little more residential. So Dodge and Governor are just a little bit different animal than some of the others that have been converted. Jurisdictional implications. So I mentioned that Iowa DOT owns and maintains both roadways today. If conversion takes place, DOT would transfer one of the corridors back to the city. We expect that would probably be Governor Street, as I mentioned, and Dodge Street would remain Iowa 1. So we did have a meeting with Iowa DOT to kind of talk over this concept. They do anticipate that there would not be any additional improvements made to Governor Street. They feel it's in a state of good repair. It was resurfaced in 2018. They also would be taking on a little bit of additional roadway width on Dodge Street due to that center left turn lane. And it's worth noting that 2 blocks of Burlington Street would also be transferred to the city east of Dodge Street, where it would no longer be Iowa 1. Overall, Iowa DOT is not seeking out two-way conversion, but they would be willing to work with the city if that's what folks would desire.
I assume that you're going to get to who's paying for this at some point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so that's a big factor, and that's right here. So the current estimate for the opinion of probable construction cost is OPCC for the reconstruction of Dodge Street is $17.6 million. That would maintain one-way and fully reconstruct the street, including the utilities. The city cost share is estimated at $10.6 million of that right now. So there's always cost share on these state routes. In this case, the city is electing to replace a lot of the utilities that are out there, and that's really what's driving a lot of that cost share, the $10.6 million. If it were converted, we do expect there'd be some additional costs, about additional $3 million due to that additional roadway width, signal upgrades on Dodge Street. So currently, they're all facing to the north because it's southbound traffic. You'd have to have signals that can control both directions of traffic. There'd be new signs, there'd be signal removals on Governor Street, and restriping for both of the streets, both corridors. Additionally, moving forward, there'd be ongoing maintenance to the city for Governor Street, which currently Iowa DOT pays for. Plowing, restriping, street sweeping, those sorts of things. And at some point, Governor would need to be reconstructed, and that would be fully on the city's dime instead of shared with Iowa DOT. And we estimate that could be $15 to $20 million somewhere down the line. So that $15 to $20 million represents 2 to 3 years of the city's annual budget for streets. So it's a sizable thing to take on. And it's a big consideration, which is why you asked about it. As far as the schedule goes, as I mentioned, preliminary design does need to get going. Most of the design would occur in 2025, and any easements needed for construction would be obtained in 2025. Construction documents prepared in 2026, with construction starting in the fall. So about 2 years from this fall, construction could start, and expected to be a 2-year construction project, 2 seasons of construction. If two-way conversion were pursued further, there would be additional time needed for real estate likely. We expect that there might need to be some permanent real estate acquired instead of just easements. So it would push out the completion of the Dodge Street reconstruction project probably by at least a year.
When you say additional, like not just easements, but real estate, I mean, do you mean properties?
Yes, yeah. There could be the need for additional properties in order to accommodate the wider street, the parkway for trees, and there's also currently planned to be a 10-foot path on the west side of Dodge Street, a multi-use path. And so we could run out of room in a two-way scenario.
Thank you.
How wide is the street should be for two-way?
Yep, so it's today it's about 33 feet from the back of the curb to the back of the curb, and it would need to be about 53 feet if it were two-way. We would need to do a little more investigation on that center left turn lane. There may be a few places where the volumes in the side streets are low enough that you wouldn't need it, but because they're so closely spaced, it might not be worth narrowing the street up only to have to widen it again. So that would need a little more investigation, but about 20 feet wider for two-way operation.
Thank you.
You mentioned that some of the reason that the cost share seems burdensome for the city is the infrastructure replacement costs. Is the infrastructure under that street currently ready to be replaced anyway? Or is that, I mean, we're at a moment where it has to be done, or?
Yeah, I would defer to the city a little bit more on that, but my understanding is portions of it, yes, the sanitary and the water main. There'll also be some storm sewer upgrades as well. And that would happen either way, whether it's maintained as one-way or two-way, yeah.
You mentioned.
But how much that will cost, I'm sorry, but how much that would cost if we did not do the street and only repair the sewer and everything there?
Well, I think the plan is the street would be reconstructed either way. The $10.6 million city share, a decent amount of that is the utilities. I don't know that we have that on hand, the share of the utilities, but and that's something the city is ready to do at any rate.
Okay.
You mentioned the reasons why cities typically convert, one to two ways. Is there any rationale or reasons why we're considering this?
I think it goes back a ways. I think it's in the city plan to consider it, to evaluate it. We talked about it before we started the functional design several years ago, and at that time decided to just move ahead with a one-way condition. But I know it's been something that some former council members have asked that the engineering department look at. So I think now's the time to do it, because this big reconstruction project is coming along, and it does impact the design. So we sort of need to understand if it has legs, if we're going to pursue this or not.
Sure, certainly we've heard of speed considerations for these streets.
And yet
Yeah,
it-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but based on what you were talking about with the study, the current mitigations that have been put in place, signage and reminders, seem to have helped a little?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think anecdotally, we haven't collected data on that, but I think even myself driving it, it does seem as though people are moving a little bit more slower coming down the hill. The speed feedback signs are pretty effective. And there could be an opportunity to implement a few other things that might help slow vehicles down, even if it were to remain one way. That would require some additional discussion, and there's a cost associated with any of those kinds of things as well.
Curious, you mentioned that our couplet is odd and that it's for a residential neighborhood, and also cities that are doing this are typically ones that are seeing declining downtowns with fewer people. I think ours is pretty robust and great. Do you have any examples of places that have done this that have a similar situation to us?
Well, I do have a pretty good example, a study that we completed for City of Madison about 5 or 6 years ago. It was on Johnson and Gorham Street, which is a one-way pair on the Isthmus in downtown Madison. And that's also, it's fairly residential, but it does have a stretch of a few blocks where there's storefronts and some commercial. And the study, in that study, parking was kind of the driving factor. And so that's not quite an apples-to-apples comparison with Dodge and Governor. But in that case, in order to convert to two-way, they were going to need to, there was on-street parking existing. They were going to need to restrict the parking during peak hours to provide 2 lanes in the morning and 2 lanes out in the afternoon. Just from a traffic volume standpoint, it carried about double the traffic as this one-way pair. And the businesses were really concerned about losing that parking during the peak periods. And that was a key reason in that case why the city maintained the one-way operation. So it's still not a perfect example, but it is more residential, and it is a case where it was studied, but one-way pairs were chosen to remain. Yeah.
You have mentioned that, you might need more space to make the street wider, and that's when maybe you're going to take some of the, to widen the street, you're going to take like some of the houses. You mean like the front yard you take from their front yard, or?
Yeah.
Or how is that? That's what you mean?
Yes. Yeah, it would likely be, if right-of-way was needed, if more space was needed, it would be strip takings along the front of these properties. I don't think any buildings would need to be purchased. It wouldn't be a complete purchase. There are some areas where matching into the existing carriageways, the walks up to the street, there's some places that have steps and things like that. So once we get into design, there's going to be some challenges with matching all that in, but that's pretty typical of a street reconstruction project. There may be places where short walls are needed and that sort of thing, particularly because of the 10-foot wide multi-use path on the west side. That's a pretty big change to fit that in there. But again, with the two-way conversion and a wider street footprint, there may need to be some strip takings of right-of-way along the route.
And if, just you mean the right of the way, or you mean like we take from property and do we pay them, or how that work?
Yeah, that's right. It would be paid at market value to the property owners, but yes, it would be coming from people that own the houses or the businesses along the street.
Is that
And this is included on the $10 million our share, or?
Yeah,
or that's gonna be extra?
No, the $10 million cost share assumes one-way operation is maintained, and we don't expect to need property in that situation. We'll probably need some easements in order to construct it. So the $10 million does not include any real estate costs, any permanent real estate cost.
Sure, thank you.
Is now a good time to share just general feedback? Yeah, okay. So as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about it using kind of the POP method, the purpose outcome process way of just thinking about the whole thing. And I think the purpose is generally admirable. I think we should always be moving towards slower streets for safety reasons. The outcome and the process is what really kind of concerns me. It seems to me that we would be spending a whole lot of money to achieve basically slower streets in a way that is extremely disruptive to a lot of the neighbors. And that really concerns me personally. Tens of millions of dollars, 3 years worth of funding that would have to come through eventually, and that number is only going to go up as time goes on, and completely losing the state's contribution towards the maintenance of North Governor. It's not great, in my opinion, honestly. I would feel much more comfortable if we're really super concerned about speeds, maybe putting a more moderate amount of money into, additional speed mitigation on those areas, or, something like that. But the cost is really considerable, especially with the long-term costs of maintenance and all that.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good segue into the last slide here, and that is our recommendation also. I think the typical benefits of two-way conversion just aren't as applicable to Dodge and Governor as sometimes for other. Market and Jefferson's going to be converted from one-way to two-way, and that's probably a better candidate right here within Iowa City. So I would tend to agree with you, but there's definitely there's pros and cons to consider.
Can I ask just a general question? Were there any outcomes that were unexpected to you in conducting this study, based on what kind of you're like, okay, here's what we have,
right?
And then once you dove into it, was there anything that was unexpected or interesting to you that again we might take that nugget and be able to do something with?
Sure. Well, that's a good question. I think once we saw the volumes and we saw that and we've been working on this corridor for a while, so we have some sense for what it's like. But I think our initial inclination was that maintaining one way would work. We wanted to see the safety record especially. And, crash records, that's always, we're looking backwards with crash records. And so you always want to be cognizant of, the perception that's out there as well. So that'd be something to consider. I don't know if any of you get complaints about Dodge Street often or that sort of thing, but looking at the numbers, I think I sort of agree that for the dollars it would cost to convert it, as well as putting another street on the city's books again, it doesn't seem like the benefits are worth that. So I don't know that anything was unexpected, although the corridor itself is it's just sort of a little bit of a different animal because of the land use, and it seems to work pretty well the way it is, and I think it could work better even with one-way operation. So I think that's why we landed where we did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I share Councilor Dunn's I was excited about this project and interested to see, but to understand what it does for people who live on Dodge Street and what we get for it, it was I'm not very excited about it right now, especially because we are absolutely picking winners and losers in this situation. If you live on Governor, things get a lot better. If you live on Dodge, you're going to lose front yard and have an increased traffic in front of your house.
Much wider, much more road.
Yeah, and that's a disappointing outcome. Not your fault, but definitely influences how I think about this being not a great idea for us, and accepting this recommendation.
I would also just note that many counselors, previous and kind of present, tend to say we absolutely want road diets and slower streets, and yet I will say this, that and I know it's been pointed out that Dodge and Governor, that it's a drawback that they're not signalized a lot. On the flip side, this is one of the only ways to get from the south to the north and vice versa. And it is helpful for commuters to have a fairly direct way of doing this without stop, start, that much of east-west Iowa City has. So I just wanted to put that out to council as well, that there's also a real use value in having basically a streamlined way to get from north to south. So,
Yeah, that's a good point.
I agree. I also agree with everyone, what you said, with Council Don and Josh and Megan. But also just think about it. We're spending a lot of money. 20,000 for governors, 10 million for governor, 10 million for governor for that, and 20 million for governor. You know how many affordable housing that can build? If we remain it, we cannot just focus on the street and leave the people live in the street. You know, I think this is not the time for it. I agree that for Jefferson and Market, because this is really become beneficial for the businesses who are there.
Right.
And, you know, it is really great. But for governor and we're going to spend all this money, I'm really against it because, you know, we don't want to build the streets and make the people live in the street. So we have to really be careful on doing this. Thank you.
Dodge Street, is it going to be 10 million, 10.3 million cost share regardless?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct, yep. And probably goes up a little bit if it's two-way, yeah.
Sure, and it would go up if it's two-way.
Yep.
So as I think about, and then Dodge Street, regardless of if it's two-way or kept one-way, the DOT will continue to keep that under their umbrella.
Correct, yep. That's what we anticipate, and that hasn't been finalized, but I think everyone's
Sure.
initial reaction is Dodge would remain Iowa 1, and Governor would go back to the city.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that, you know, when I look at Market Street, we'll be talking about that at some point about should we convert that or not to two-way. There are businesses along there. And I remember back in the day where we got the presentation and it talked about the advantages a business could have when people are going opposite directions. And that's not the situation for Dodge. Now, I do want to acknowledge that on Governor Street, we do have the old DHS building. And then on Dodge Street, we have over by Church and Dodge, we have Ace and a few businesses right there on the corner. So don't want to, you know, not acknowledge that we do have some businesses there. But this to me doesn't seem like the need is there, especially when we think about the increase of 50% of traffic that's going to take place on Dodge.
Yeah.
I guess the one question I would have to the staff or to whomever is there ever going to be a desire? Can you anticipate a desire in the future where specifically Dodge would be asked again to be two-way streets?
That's a good question.
Is there any type of situation in your professional that would bring that up again? Because now the prices they're astronomical now, they're a lot, but if we wait 15, 20 years and this come before the council again, you know, that number is going to be way more than what it is now. So that's just a question that I wanted to know if there's anything that would say in the future this may be converted. We try to begin with the end in mind.
Sure.
I'm struggling to think of that scenario, Mayor, and I'm not getting anything different from our Public Works staff. So
Great.
I think you're right to think about that. This is the time if we're going to do it. But as staff, and we've been really supportive of some two-way to one-way conversions, even on this corridor south of Burlington. We've done this work. We've done this work downtown with Washington Street, too. You may remember that there used to be some one-ways in downtown Iowa City as well. This one just doesn't compute for us, and I think the fact that the state owns it and maintains it is a huge factor. And then, as you noted, the largely residential makeup of this corridor.
And I could be wrong, but I think that the only way that this would be something that a council of 20 years from now would be looking at is if we stagnate or grow smaller as a city, whereby the need for having that kind of egress happens. But it seems like the gains of having it two-way to slow down actually end up countering some of the walkability neighborhood feel because of the widening of the road to that extent.
Right.
Not to mention, people feel very strongly about small walls built in their front yards. So, just mention all of that. But the thing that I'm thinking about is 20 years from now, the reason why we would need to have this kind of, traffic calming or what have you, again, if it were to surface again, because primarily of safety, would be if we've not grown at all, and there's a walkability or neighborhood perception of it, or that Dodge became commercial, right?
Right.
So,
Right, which is probably pretty unlikely.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, I
Yep.
mean, I'm trying to think through the steps of your
Absolutely.
question
Sure,
and
sure.
to try and say, at least this is what I'm thinking about, even though I'm a layperson. But just based on the information that you've given us, that would be,
Yeah.
so, thank you.
Well, and thanks to everyone just for jumping in on that. For me, I am fully convinced that keeping it one way at this point is the most appropriate direction. I see my fellow counselors nodding their heads. So, any other questions? I don't hear any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. On with,
Great.
on with the design.
Great. Any other discussion on this by council? Does staff need anything more definitive?
No, thank you.
Okay, all right. We are going to move on to item number 3, update related to the new tobacco permit moratorium. We're going to turn it over to our city attorney, Eric Gores.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'd like to just kind of situate us first on procedural posture and then go through some introduction, probably more for the benefit of the public than the council, who's I'm sure had an opportunity to read the memo I produced last week on this topic. So as council is aware, council passed a moratorium on new tobacco permits that is to run through the end of this calendar year. And then council did that in order to allow time to research different mitigation means of the kind of rapidly expanding tobacco uses within the city and the public health effects that come with it. And I'll circle back to that for a moment, but first, as you recall, I laid out in the memo kind of the regulatory framework and some potential solutions for council's consideration this afternoon. I'll try to set the table for that discussion and summarize my memo very briefly, including my recommendation should council wish to do something on this topic. But from there, I'll be seeking council's guidance on what you would like to do, and of course, we'll do our best to effectuate your wishes in that regard. So first, I want to kind of center our discussion on the rationale for regulation. Council should center their discussions on the public health effects of tobacco and tobacco sales, and I'm using tobacco and tobacco products as a bit of a broad term because there are alternative nicotine products or alternative tobacco products. There's vapor products. You know, many of those don't contain tobacco, but just as I mentioned in my memo, I'm just going to refer to them as tobacco products, although it's broader really than that. When council expressed a desire to consider regulation in this effort, my first step was to reach out to Johnson County Public Health, who's represented today here at the meeting by Susan Valletta, who's a public health educator from Public Health. The reason I point that out is that, again, that's really what this is about, is trying to mitigate the public health harms that come with tobacco use and the negative externalities that oftentimes follow particularly proliferations of tobacco outlets. We need to focus on the public health perspective. Oftentimes that's focused on preventing those who are under 21, which of course is the legal age for using tobacco products, from accessing tobacco and or reducing the ease of access for adults of tobacco products, again, for public health reasons. Now, As you're aware, there are different kinds of retailers of tobacco. There are convenience stores, there are grocery stores, and there are tobacco and vape shops. They all have the same tobacco permit, but again, even if you focus on the public health considerations of all this, you might choose to treat them differently. For example, you might choose to treat vape shops or tobacco shops differently because of their higher percentage of gross sales in tobacco, the focus of their marketing on tobacco products and tobacco products alone, the primacy of their sales and the lack of really any other kind of sales, unlike convenience stores or grocery stores, of course, that have products that are more helpful to the communities. But I want you to keep your laser focus on the public health aspects of tobacco and tobacco use when considering what, if any, regulations you'd like to pursue. So first, there are a couple, as I mentioned in my memo, a couple different flavors of regulation that you might consider. First are the non-zoning options, such as setting a hard cap on the number of tobacco retailers you will allow in city limits. You could have that just as a firm number, or you could have that float with the number of residents within the community, such that if the population of Iowa City went up or down, the requisite number of permits that you would allow would go up and down in a corresponding fashion. Or you might consider the zoning options. Usually that would entail a minimum separation distance between tobacco retailers and or minimum separation distances between what I'll characterize as sensitive populations, such as schools, public parks, libraries, places you would expect to find young people. But of course, because the legal age used to be 18 for tobacco, is now 21, that could well include university properties, since I don't have statistics in front of me, but I would assume that a large percentage of their student body would remain under 21 at any given moment. You also asked me to consider other substances such as kratom or nitrous oxide, sometimes referred to as using or misusing, I should say, as part of whippets. As I mentioned in my memo, both are presently legal. I think it would be easier to regulate one, kratom, than it would be to regulate nitrous oxide because of the legitimate uses that come with nitric oxide or laughing gas, both in dental or medical offices and whipped cream dispensers, whereas I'm unaware, at least, of any legitimate uses of kratom. I shouldn't say legitimate, and I should say healthy choices of kratom, as it's not presently illegal. It's listed as a drug of concern by the FDA, but it's not currently illegal. So, again, if council chooses to regulate, as I mentioned in my memo, I would recommend somewhat of a hybrid solution, that is, including some kind of cap, whether fixed or floating would be up to you, as well as separation distances from at least from each other, so you don't have the effects of a higher density, which can lead to external problems, and of course greater access, particularly in areas of higher density living, such as downtown, where you have a lot of young people living in particular, and or minimum separation distances from schools or public parks, libraries, that kind of thing. It came a little late to include, but I'll be sure to email to each of you a link that Johnson County Public Health was kind enough to put together. In my memo, I made reference to the map that they had done and was able to depict where present tobacco retailers are within city limits, so you can kind of see the spread and the density in different parts of town. But they've also been able to add a couple features. One is the ability to add either 500-foot or 1,000-foot buffers around each of those retailers. Also identifying parks and schools and adding buffers of 500 feet or 1,000 feet around them as well. If those are the kind of things that are interesting to you, I would recommend doing that piecemeal. If you do it all at once, it gets to be an awfully busy map, but it's easy enough to kind of toggle those on and off so you can get a good sense as to what is where and what a 500-foot or 1,000-foot buffer zone around each of those various kind of things would result in. With that, I'll be happy to hear your thoughts and hear more about what you would like to see achieved, and happy to answer any questions I can. Admittedly, there may be some that I'll need to come back to you. Oh, and one other thing I should lay out as well. I mentioned that there's both zoning and non-zoning possible solutions or tools that are available to you. Of course, if we go with a zoning solution, that would need to go through planning and zoning before coming back to you. This would be council-driven, so I would write it up consistent with your guidance and then send it to P&Z for their recommendation to you. If you did not do a zoning solution, it would just come straight back to you. That's all.
Just for clarification, before we actually start having some discussion here, with what the county sent, all these sites,
Yeah.
your recommendations, everyone is grandfathered in that is currently with a permit. Is that correct?
Well, that's what I would recommend. Of course, that's up to you.
Okay.
And if you were to set a cap, you could, presently there are 63 retailers. You could set that number at what you wish. I would probably want to include some language making it clear that with cessation of use, that is, if any of the present retailers were to stop operating or stop selling tobacco for some set period of time, much like we do with alcohol drinking establishments downtown, that they would lose those grandfather rights. But again, that would depend on what you folks would want to see insofar as right-sizing the number of retailers within the city limits.
Thank you for that clarification. All right.
Awesome. I have a series of comments, and the first thing I want to do is I want to thank you for all the work that you guys have put in on this. This clearly took a decent amount of time, so I really want to share that appreciation. In terms of my perspective on where we should go with this, I think that capping the number of retailers coupled with keeping retailers away from sensitive populations and minimum distances between retailers, as well as a ban on kratom. And I'd also like to explore creative ways to potentially regulate whippets. Like, one of the things that I think of in that context is, are we allowed to say that it can't be sold by an entity like Hy-Vee, for example? Like, you wouldn't say like that, but like, can we say that they have to have the required permitting that, for example, like a grocery store would have to have? A lot of the places that are currently selling these products would not have that same permitting level of permitting.
When you say the permitting, what permitting are you?
So like whatever, like I assume that like a grocery store, for example, that's going to be selling nitrous oxide in the sense of like whipped cream,
Yeah.
they're going to have different certifications from the Iowa Department of Public Health in ways that they operate and sell food and also store food, right?
Oh, well, certainly, I don't know that that's specific to nitrous oxide.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying, but I'm
okay.
saying, could we say that in order to sell this product, you have to be either like licensed for medical use or whatever, however we'd want to carve that out for medical uses of that product, or basically having the certifications and permits of a grocery store?
That's something we could explore.
Yeah, that would be what I'm interested in, just exploring that. Other than that, the rest of things, as recommended, seem really great to me.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I could, I agree with at least the first couple of things that Councilor Dunn was talking about in terms of limiting on licensing. I'd like to discuss like where we want to put that cap. Certainly no higher than what it is currently. If we reduce that number, then it would be sort of one of those like by attrition, not yanking them away, but as they phase out, I would be okay with looking at those would be some factors I would be happy and actually would look forward to talking with. In terms of minimum distances, so that's the zoning-related issues. Again, keeping them away from more vulnerable populations and what that might look like. I'm very interested in digging deeper on that. I'm going to depart from you on the whipped cream issue. I don't see that as being a feasible thing to to implement. And certainly, and the Kratom ban too, I would agree with you on that. But in terms of like those first three things, I think.
So you're with me with the Kratom?
Yeah, the Kratom, yeah. But the, those three, I think, to me, are the priority. I'm not so sure that that fourth thing is doable or desirable, although, and that's something that's been around since before I was a kid. So, I mean, it's just not a new thing, where some of these other issues, the understanding of the health risks of tobacco certainly have become much more robust since, I was 20 years old, so.
I tend to agree that a hybrid solution makes sense. I think the zoning tool alone can lead to some unintended consequences. And our 500-foot bar rule has done some real good, but it's also had some unintended consequences. So I like coupling it with some caps. And then, of course, we will be focused on sensitive populations. I would say that absolutely should include the University of Iowa. And then as far as there was a brief discussion about percentage of sales, that I would suggest is probably not something that administratively the city wants to try to do a lot of and track that on a regular basis. I just feel like that seems regulating certain businesses differently based on percentage of sales, something we do in other actually realms, but it seems not something that the businesses city maybe wants to be in.
Yeah, we do a little bit of it in the alcohol realm when we have exception certificates for the under 21 ordinance. Normally these are restaurants, but it could be bowling alleys and something else if they have more than 50% of their sales in something other than alcohol. And, we cause them to, or require them to submit an affidavit, kind of a sworn affidavit about the percentage of sales. We reserve the right to audit those numbers at their expense. Is there some administrative burden with handling that? Yes, there is. Would we have some difficulty kind of proving of that case if we had to? Maybe. We haven't been in that position before, but potentially. Certainly that's more complicated than is it 500 feet away from another retailer or from a school property? Like, well, that's simple.
Yeah, and getting back to what Eric said earlier, I think you really just need to ask yourself if there's a compelling public health reason to look at stores that have a large percentage of their products in this realm, in the tobacco realm, right? Are they marketing exclusively differently? Is there something unique about them that creates a unique public health hazard to those? And I think that's ultimately, if you want to go to percentage of sales, you should be able to articulate why you think those businesses that have a higher percentage of their sales in tobacco and tobacco-related products create a more significant public health concern than those that don't.
I have a question about, I recognize I'm in agreement with Councilor Harmsen and most of what Councilor Dunn has said, although, yes, I think at a certain point we need to kind of take our hands off of some of the regulatory things that were proposed. But say we hash this all out, I'm interested in timeline because we've had a couple of different contexts where we've had some unintended consequences, right? And we have been emailed about the pause on the potential cessation of a sale right now of a business that would go to that. So I'm wondering on the timeline of this, like, can we do it, like, once we have agreed upon what we want and give Eric and staff direction, how does that work in terms of then being able to cease the moratorium, allow whatever our, let's call it 63, plus our floating, what have you. Once we've hashed out our details and we say this is the direction we would like to follow, what then do we do to enable the businesses that would be covered? Sorry, I'm not putting this way. What would we do timeline-wise so that somebody who wants to sell their business can?
Sure. Well, Part of that would depend on whether you folks choose a zoning or non-zoning solution for the reasons I outlined. If, we add a step if there's zoning because it needs to go through planning and zoning before it comes back to council, then normally there'd be 3 readings. Of course, you could collapse if you so chose to make that typically 2 readings if you wanted to do that. It is my vision that once you get to the point of deciding what it is you want to do in that way, certainly no later than that final reading of the ordinance, you would lift a moratorium and go from there and implement whatever it is the new solution is that you folks have decided on. Of course, you could modify the resolution or the moratorium by resolution now, but I would be hesitant to do that just because, at least I'm not yet clear where you want to go, and we'd want to make sure that whatever you do is consistent with what you want to see achieved through the regulatory steps that you do implement.
Yeah, no, and it's this kind of very delicate balancing act because I'm absolutely in favor of trying to limit, public health hazards. And I was surprised to see it was 7 businesses, which is actually quite a lot, but it feels like it's more.
Yeah.
And so I was surprised at that. And yet I'm also concerned about something that was in process and was going to go through, namely the sale of this business, and through no fault of their own, have that stopped in its tracks.
Yeah,
So, but I
understand.
do agree. I do not think that we should just say lift it and not have this vision clearly delineated before we do that. So
a sample timeline might be if you're able to give us some general direction tonight, right? We're hearing hybrid solution, and we might have some prompting questions to kind of wrap things up. We would probably want to return to you in this type of setting, a work session, to say, and let's say we do that in August. We'd say, okay, here's what we heard. Here's the framework of the regulations, and then we would be looking at planning and zoning meeting. That's at this point probably going to be a September planning and zoning meeting, and then best case scenario, you're looking at completing this in October, and that may depend on your willingness to collapse. Otherwise, you're probably into that first week in November, and that assumes, right, we have the capacity to draft it. P&Z can process it in 1 meeting, and that, again, you guys can process it in 2 or maybe 3 meetings. And then, as Eric said, we're releasing that moratorium or ending it at the time of the 3rd reading. So after that 3rd reading is done, one of your next agenda items would be to terminate or end the moratorium.
What are the pros and cons of, if we take a hybrid approach, of doing both parts of the hybrid simultaneously versus, in 2 different timeframes? Is there any thought on?
Well,
that makes a
yeah, I
difference?
would recommend doing them together. Now, to be clear, the planning and zoning portion, or I should say the zoning portion would be the only portion that goes to planning and zoning, but it would feel a little funny to me to, do the
a cap, for example.
Yes, right. Of course, you could, but it would make sense to me to kind of time it in such a way that, you're done with everything at one time.
Okay.
Would it be a good understanding to say that we could also just take care of the Kratom thing at our next meeting?
Well,
we can do that separately, right?
I'm sorry?
We can do that separately. That action should be separate, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
You could do it separately. Again, I think that would be an ordinance, so you'd be 3 readings, 2 if you choose to collapse. But I would need to, 1, hear a consensus on that, and then 2, make sure that there aren't any exceptions, or, I can't think of any, but I would want to make sure I understand your wishes. And if so, and you were willing to consider it as a standalone measure, I could certainly bring something like that back to you at your next meeting.
Cool.
So one thing that hasn't been discussed is for the capping of the number of retailers, if that's going to be imposed on the entire city, or is that going to be within a geographical area? I mean, we have 26 square miles in the city, and of course, as we continue to grow, there's probably going to be some permits or some desire for, some of these activities along those areas, which until I understand if this is going to be citywide or within a geographical area, I don't know that I can, really say that, the minimum distance should be 500, 1,000, or whatever that might be, or the sensitive locations. So at least for my colleagues, I would like to know, what are people thinking? Is it citywide, or is it going to be a geographical area?
I mean, I guess in my mind, I was thinking citywide. I hadn't really thought about it in any other terms, to be honest with you, until you just mentioned it now. So that's, we're talking about the cap now or the zoning?
The cap, but everything depends on the cap.
Yeah. No, that's what I was thinking of, if that was your question, Mr. Mayor.
I think of it citywide just because I think that we're going to get into some fraught legal territory if we say this area can have this many and this area can have this many and all that. So I would tend to go towards citywide.
It's certainly cleaner to just do it citywide, and I know you haven't had the benefit of looking at this map with the buffers, but I have it in front of me, in fact, right now, and even a 500-foot buffer, eliminates. And I'm sorry, just 500 feet between retailers eliminates a lot of downtown, if not most of downtown. If you were to add in sensitive, spots, especially if that included university property, you would take up most of the rest of the downtown area. Whereas the rest of town is quite a bit more sparse. Of course, it's concentrated, as you might expect, along commercial corridors. Highway 1 and 6, for example, has a few.
I agree as well, citywide makes sense.
Okay.
Citywide
Yeah,
makes sense.
thanks for at least that clarification of citywide, because I wasn't sure where people's thoughts were.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to think through a citywide cap. If you set it below the number that we have right now, you're probably going to run into more of the examples that Councilor Alter was talking about, where you might have some isolated retailers that may fall subject to this. So if you were to set the cap at the current number, I think with the 500-foot rule, if one goes out, the next one is not going to come in next to a sensitive area or next to a sensitive population or in a heavily concentrated area now. But we probably just want to think through a little bit, and that's really, staff can do that as we work on this. But setting a hard cap below that number right now, I think the chances for unintended consequences on retailers that probably aren't at the top of our concern from a public health standpoint. We could see more of that.
And just one observation, I think, Jeff, following up on that, it would be helpful to have staff walk us through when we have our next discussion about if there's that cap, kind of if there's a sweet spot that you could identify or help us identify, because even setting it at the exact number right now, I think we know from the liquor license limitations really.
Nobody gets rid of them.
Yeah, I mean, it almost guarantees that there will be a liquor license in a place where there has been one before. And so I think, thinking about, is there a place where we could set the cap that the 500-foot rule would still minimize in the areas that we're trying to avoid the concentrations, but wouldn't create maybe as much pressure financially for there to be a vape shop replacing a vape shop every time?
Very, very much on our mind, too, yes.
One of the other things we'd want to consider if you were to set the cap below the current number or even close to the current number are the situations in which I believe Councilor Alter was referring, in which we've got a retailer who's selling to another, one convenience store selling to another chain of convenience store and so forth. Well, that's a change of ownership, so that's a new permit. Well, do you want to allow that? Yes or no? And I would want to get that sense from council, whether you would consider that in some fashion a grandfathered, a location which has, in the last year operated or had a, tobacco permit would be allowed or not.
If we kept it at the current number or close to that, that would be allowed under that, right? It would still be under the total citywide cap.
Well, I'd need to confirm with the clerk's office, because I think yes, because I think those businesses remain in operation with, I'll say, the seller's tobacco permit in place. And so I think yes, but I would want to confirm.
Sure, no, that sounds like a good answer, or a good question to answer.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where the sensitive populations layer can come in, right? Under that scenario that Eric mentioned, is that new convenience store in that example within 500 feet of a sensitive population or not? I think we can look at that nuance too.
Just for our next conversation, I guess the hypothetical I'd be interested in is what happens if we have bad actors who have a permit, who follow our rules? What's talked through the process of somebody who's repeatedly selling to minors? In this situation, currently, the current situation, we don't issue a tobacco permit or take it away. How do we need to write something extra into this future code to sort of address that?
I don't think so, because it's long been our office's position that because the state specifically spells out consequences for sales to minors. This is the first offense, second offense, third offense, fourth offense. We said, well, that's the remedy for that, and we're kind of, for better or worse, stuck with that remedy. We kind of feel like there's field preemption there, at least insofar as those consequences are concerned. So I don't think we need to write anything like that into whatever new regulatory scheme you folks consider.
Sure. I just wouldn't want a situation where a business would have their license taken away and immediately sell it to the next business because
Right.
we've used a zoning tool.
Well, in that case, they would sell it, let's hypothetically say they would sell it to a new business. And again, that would depend on how you wanted to craft your grandfathering. That would have to be a new permit because, again, the change of ownership needs a new permit. And, if you didn't want to see that kind of thing allowed as a grandfather rights, we could exclude it.
And I think that's a public health question that we have to consider. If we're going to be putting in place these buffers of whatever that distance is, and that is something that, I don't know, you may be looking for some direction now
Yeah.
on that.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to state that currently for the liquor license, as Councilor Burgess talked about, many people don't get rid of them because at least downtown where we have some buffer restrictions, once a property is sold or business is sold, they have 1 year to occupy, to be able to use that liquor, to be able to get a liquor permit that will be allowed. So the question would be for us, how do we envision once ownership is changing, are we going to be taking into consideration the buffer distance, sensitive locations at that point, or are they just grandfathered in with a time frame of 1 year that you would have to occupy the space, or at least, I think it was occupy the space.
Yeah, with
actually.
alcohol, you have to either abandon or cease the drinking establishment use for at least a year to lose those grandfather rights, and that's happened. I mean, that's led to some attrition downtown. Now, it does, as you said, it's a year in alcohol. It doesn't have to be a year with tobacco. I've seen examples or advocates in this field say 60 days. That's up to you folks.
I guess me personally, I would like to see a policy that gets the currently permitted people, or rather not necessarily the currently permitted people, but the current areas that would violate would be grandfathered in pretty much out of there as soon as possible. Of course, we can't prevent them, but I don't want to see personally a lot of easy ability to transfer it to other folks. I think that should be a priority. Our priority should not be to make sure that these spots that are currently held up in these sensitive areas where our policy will eventually exclude them from being. I think the policy should lead toward it, not pushing them out, but as natural attrition occurs, I'd like to see those places not present anymore.
So would you like to see that only upon, interruptions in use of tobacco permit, or even just, consistent use, just a sale from, buyer to seller, person A to person B?
I'm not sure I quite understand.
Yeah, well, to use the mayor's example of the 1 year for alcohol licensing and so forth, that has less to do with, I mean, not that there isn't licensing with alcohol, of course there is, and if there's a change in ownership, stuff needs to happen there as well. But my question to you is, would you like to just track that, or would you like to even say, if you sell your business, to someone else, that will require a new permit for that buyer? They don't get a tobacco permit.
Bingo.
Okay.
That would be my stance.
I'd like to see if there's a consensus on that.
These are within the sensitive areas?
Within the sensitive areas.
It would still depend on the sensitive area
Yes.
and the buffer.
Yes. Yeah.
Are we talking about layering both the 500 feet and the sensitive areas?
Well, 500 feet might be for both. I would say the two groups are retailer to retailer.
Right,
That would
that's
be
what
one
I meant,
separation.
sorry.
And sensitive, populations of schools, et cetera, would be the other.
Do you have any sense of what, if there are ways we could craft this to minimize the likelihood of preemption?
That's a good question.
Sure. I suspect if we were to say no more tobacco, we're not going to issue any more tobacco permits, on July 1st of 2025, which would be the next time council does that, absent new stores and so forth. I am guessing that would draw legislative attention. I suspect that many of the larger chains that have tobacco permits, think grocery stores and convenience stores, for example, have strong lobbying forces behind them. If you were to take action that they didn't like, I could imagine there would be some lobbying done with that. I don't know, what form that would take. I don't know that there's a big. Anyone wants to be seen as championing the tobacco industry at the state level, but I don't know.
There's plenty. There's plenty. I guess one thing that I think of to specifically kind of address those concerns, because I think those concerns for us would typically come from, different grocery store chains or convenience store chains, that could suggest that we might have an opportunity to say, like, unless you have, less than 50% of your sales in tobacco, because, like, there's no real reason, I think, that we should be preventing, like, a grocery store like Hy-Vee from renewing their permit on a location where they've been forever, or decades, in my opinion. I mean, I think that goes without saying. Like, it is a bit of a different situation.
So you would like to see grocery stores, and would you put convenience stores in a similar?
Yeah, like a gas station.
Yeah.
I think that that's a bit of a different situation than what we're necessarily trying to prevent.
I would just say, only because we're talking about a big store, and I understand, we've been having, this discussion is really because of the public health concerns that we have from so many of these being put in, concentrated areas. But we have to consider small business as well. I think the sensitive locations is probably what's going to get us a little bit raffled at the state level because, even for example, if we keep the sensitive locations and let's say a Hy-Vee want to go next to a school or something like that, they can't do it. If we keep that sensitive location. So I just want to bring up that there are small business owners that are going to be excluded potentially if we go with what you just mentioned.
Well, no, the way I think you might be understanding it differently. I think, like, if we have, for example, like a Hy-Vee going in next to a school, I think that's something that we could put in part of the regulation would be, well, that applicant for a permit is not doing more than 50% of their sales on tobacco ever. Like, even gas stations aren't doing more than 50% of their sales on tobacco, I'd assume.
Yeah, the number I was given by Casey's senior counsel, I thought was something like 6%.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, something like that, I think, would allow for some flexibility there and ensure that, like, the areas that we're trying to protect are being protected. The businesses, big and small, are being protected. And it's really targeting the more problematic areas, in my opinion. The problematic areas and the areas that are also trying to market these dangerous substances much more provocatively, much more targeted towards sensitive populations. The grocery store doesn't do that as much.
Well, and the clarifying comment I would offer about the grocery store opening next to the school is that, of course, they could open next to the school, they just couldn't sell tobacco.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things we started this talking about the health stuff, and we do have somebody from the
Yeah.
health department here, so I wondered if I could invite you up to the thing to answer a couple of quick questions. One is, you've heard us talk about a variety of different approaches that we as a council are concerned about taking. Would love to get your input on kind of bringing us back to the health portion of this. Are these the kinds of things that in other places have had a positive health impact in communities? Have other communities done this? You know, I would love some chat. I'll have a couple other follow-up questions, but can we start there maybe?
Yeah.
And Susan, can you, just for the record, state
Yep.
your name and your position first?
Yep, Susan Villata. I work at Johnson County Public Health, and I've been working on tobacco prevention and control for about 16 years. For states that have preemption, what Eric has outlined is what you can do, right? Laura, you said what else we can, of course, I would love you to try something else because it hasn't been tried in this state, right? But legally, right, that's the list. The things that I want to point out are making sure that, like, these unintended consequences, that we don't move folks to a certain neighborhood, right? I encourage you to look at what convenience stores do look like in certain neighborhoods versus other neighborhoods. And while you think that Hy-Vee, right, for instance, or other grocery stores, convenience stores, that's where tobacco comes into the community, you all. I know you think of like the vape stores and what they look like, but where folks are buying, yes, downtown students and folks that frequent those areas, but everybody else is buying it where they get gas and groceries. They are. So I'd encourage you not to think about them differently. And you can feel free to ask me any questions about that. And then the number, that's something that we can look at per percentage of the population. So there might be 63 now. Math is not my strong suit, so somebody could probably run that right now. But there's kind of what's the word?
Tipping point?
Yeah, kind of a tipping point, yes. We did some research around the whole state in 2016, like an amount per population that seems more reasonable than others. So that's something that we can get back to you on too.
I kind of want to follow up on a statement you made about where people are buying tobacco products. Do you know, are young people buying tobacco at different places than not young people?
So sales information is difficult to get sometimes in terms of those numbers. I'm trying to think back over the years. There usually becomes those places, right, that young people know they can buy alcohol with their fake. They know they can, get tobacco products. It's all about kind of where you frequent the most, but kind of where you're walking by, right? Easy access is kind of what Eric said at the beginning, and that's how it happens. I can look to see if I can give you better numbers on that.
Yeah.
Could we expect from some of the things we're talking about here to have an impact, especially among youth smoking, which is, a concern of mine? I have high school age kids. They see a lot of their friends, with the vaping and other products. I have a wife who's a physician and have heard quite a bit about the damage that we're just now starting to understand. So that's where I'm really coming from this, and why I'm really glad that we're on this path. Can we expect some improvement from the things we're doing?
Yeah.
If we do them?
Yeah. The more, evidence shows, the more that young people see it in the community, in those storefronts, the more apt they are to start. It's absolutely connected with initiation. The more they see it, the more likely they are to start. People trying to quit, much harder to quit if everywhere you go you're looking at it as well. It's that whole normalizing, right, of I'm going to stop and grab a water, granola bar, and then that whole wall. Like, look at that wall sometime when you go in a convenience store, right? And you try to quit and stop there for gas, right?
I have a question about the fake IDs and what the regulation is, from the state. Some places scan your ID, but not every place. What is the requirement at the state
I
level?
don't know that.
Yeah, it's just kind of a reasonableness standard. If I were to walk in, regardless of whether they scan my ID or not, they would comfortably sell to me because I'm clearly not under 21. But there's no requirement that they scan it or anything like that.
Is that something that could be a potential
Well,
that we require?
we could. I know that that's come up in the context of alcohol years ago. That's something we could consider. Again, you have to kind of think of the effects on big versus smaller businesses. Oftentimes, many of the bigger businesses have access to scanning and scanning equipment. It's obviously it's more and more prevalent, so it's easier.
I guess I don't know if my colleagues would be okay with them just exploring what an ID reader would cost and seeing what that would be legally, if that's an option for
Sure,
us.
I can look at the cost. The other thing I would add about that is kind of a question of enforcement. It's easy enough to require, ownership and use of an ID scanner. It's easy to enforce the ownership part because you can just walk in and see there it is. Enforcing the use is a little more difficult.
I, at least anecdotally, I think that most people would, if they're checking IDs at all, and that's part of their protocol, I think they would use it unless it's a good friend of theirs that,
Sure.
So, but I hear you, what you're saying. But if we can just explore what that cost
sure.
and what the legal options are for the city. And I would also expand that to alcohol as well, if people are okay with that.
Sounds like a good thing to look into. I have one additional question on the Kratom issue. If you don't know much, okay.
Not in my wheelhouse, but it's
Okay.
all over my notes to learn more.
Yeah, I was just okay. Thank you. That actually answered my
Sorry.
question. Was just trying to. I know that Councilor Dunn has voiced some urgency on that, and I just was looking for some additional information as well. So.
But speaking about that, when you write it, and I'm sure this is probably already in Eric's notes, and I just haven't seen that, but think about laws as they might change for marijuana and THC products as well. Just something to keep in mind as you write it to stay ahead of it, if you can.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you know if the county or anybody else in Johnson County is considering something similar?
You're the first. It has been brought to another city council's attention just by email, as far as I know. But there are other cities in Iowa that have already passed something somewhat similar.
Sure. I think I mentioned in my memo that Cedar Rapids has a somewhat complicated zoning ordinance which combines alcohol and tobacco outlets in the same categories. But there's 3 different tiers having to do with whether it's on-premises or off-premises consumption and whether it's above or below 50%. There are other cities within Iowa that are quite a bit simpler in their solutions and approaches to reducing the number of outlets.
All relatively recently.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. All right, counselors, we have less than 7 minutes before we're going to take a break.
I'm sorry. Were you going to summarize? I want to make sure I walk away with a few.
Please go right ahead.
Sure.
Because I want to make sure.
So the consensus that I'm hearing in this one will be a statement. There will be questions that follow. Is we'd like a hybrid solution that is both with a cap and zoning. Is that correct? All right. I'm seeing some nods. What do you want to see for the cap? Do you want it to see a fixed number and a floating number? And if so, what are you looking for with either of those answers?
I'd say fixed, personally.
I'd be inclined fixed it where it is right now, would be my inclination, although I
Okay.
can certainly listen to other arguments.
Okay. Do we have a consensus that?
And Mayor Pro Tem, just jump in, of course.
Yes, of course, yeah. I agree.
Was that agreement, Mayor Pro Tem, in fixed at the current number?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. I think I've heard at least 3. Is that 4?
I
Okay.
agree with Councilor Harmsen.
Okay. And how about sensitive locations? Would you like to include both separation from retailer to retailer and from sensitive populations, or just
Yes.
one of those two?
Yes, both.
Both? Okay. And what sensitive locations do you want? Do you want to have schools, parks, libraries, pools? There's any number that you can do. It gets obviously more and more inclusive, or, exclusive, I guess I should say, the more you add. But I guess I would recommend schools, if that's something you're interested in. The rest I'll kind of defer to you folks.
I think schools make the most sense.
So one of the examples that you have in, as far as like the separation, you have, it would be 1,000 feet from a school.
That's one of my next questions,
Right.
is the separation distance, but yeah.
So I wonder if the separation distance could just be what we do and get away from the sensitive locations. I do have some, maybe it's not real, some concern about the sensitive locations, just from kind of that being a target that the state will look at but I think the distance buffer could do what we want with the sensitive location, although it could be still adjacent to a school.
I like the idea of looking at schools as the low-hanging fruit for sensitive locations. I certainly would want some time to spend with the tool that you mentioned before coming to a decision. So I don't have as strong of a direction in my head right now, just speaking for myself.
Yeah, what I'll say is that the tool, as of early this afternoon, includes the possibility to look at both schools and parks. It does not include pools, although we don't have that many, so you could probably quickly figure that out on your own.
And in parks.
I think we can look at the school district plan. I mean, the only school that I think of immediately is that's next to a gas station is Liberty. In North
Which, of
Liberty.
course, is outside of city limits.
Right, outside of city limits. So, I mean, schools may not, we can put it there, but that may not be the.
No, I
Well,
think schools
it'll
is
keep
going to
them coming.
catch up more than you might think, particularly if you get to 1,000 feet.
And particularly if you're talking inclusively of private schools, not just
Yep.
public schools.
Sure.
Yeah, you could, I mean, you think about Tate, you think about Regina, those are all, there's close proximity to tobacco retailers. These is, and I'm looking at some of these buffers now. Twain might get caught up, that buffer may catch a few.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
I just have a question. Are we talking about new license or even for the people who have current license, which is close to school or anything?
Well, it's my understanding that the consensus from council is to allow grandfathering of present permittees. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, so we wouldn't be kicking somebody out of a
Right.
location, but if they leave, nobody else, and it's however we decide a gap.
That's how that would work, yes.
Plus, there
Okay,
would be no
that's
new ones.
sense.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
so when you mentioned schools, is that public schools, or is that also, we talked a lot about the University of Iowa.
Right. Well, that's my next question. So I guess I'm assuming public schools. I'm going to assume private schools as well. And then the final question on that for schools is the university, whether you wish to include
Yes.
university property.
Yes.
I'd definitely be interested in that as an option, so we can kind of consider what that looks like. Again, without looking at the tool and looking
Yeah.
at what some of those distances actually
Understand.
mean. But
Yeah,
I
I'd
wouldn't
like
take
to
it off the table.
Sorry, Counselor.
I've been talking a lot in this topic, I apologize.
No, I'd like to just see that option as well. I think the between retailers will solve a lot in the university area. But yeah, I think at least K-12 or I don't know, what about daycares? What about preschools?
Well, we thought of daycares, but it's when there are fewer children wandering away from
Yes.
daycares on their own.
Tobacco.
It might, stray into a thing as opposed to junior high or,
For now.
well, you would hope. All right, so what I'm hearing is schools, public, private, and the U of I. Of course, we can change this at the next discussion, but I'll do that, and that would be the only sensitive location. I'll come back with you. Is that okay?
And is that also including elementary school?
Yes, that would include elementary schools.
Okay.
And next question is 500 feet or 1,000 feet? I think 500 feet would go far.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay. And do you want to treat those that sell more than 50% in tobacco products differently than those that sell under 50% of tobacco products?
I'm a fan of the KISS principle. Like, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
With Counselor Harmsen.
Okay, treat them all the same?
I think so.
And also that
Unless we get some better.
corroborates with what we learned from the public health expert. that-
Sure.
I agree to treat them the same.
Okay. And I think finally, Kratom, we're like to ban Kratom?
think we
Is
should
there a
consider
logic
that.
to separating them in the event that we get challenged by the state?
I think we would be separating them regardless. I was envisioning this in at least two pieces. The cap, because that's non-zoning, it would appear somewhere different in the zoning code, or I'm sorry, would not be in the zoning code, and the, buffers, which would be in the zoning code and thus need to go through P&Z. It's some advantages to treating those separately. If you wanted to add the kratom, I could do it one of two ways. I could just, ban it in yet a third piece, or I could include it with the cap, which would probably be located in the city code in the same location, I'm imagining.
We should definitely do it separately.
Sorry?
I think we should definitely
Separately,
do it
so
separately.
three pieces?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. I think that is what I need to at least bring back a draft to you at your next meeting.
Thank you.
Great, great. We are at 5:45. We are going to recess from our work session, and we'll come back after our formal meeting. So I will see you back here at 6 p.m. for our formal meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, we are returning from a long recess for the City of Iowa City work session on July 16, 2024. We are at item number 4. That's where we left off, and that was clarification of agenda items. We've already covered that, so we will move on to item number 5, which is information packet discussions, and we're going to start with June 20th. June 27th. July 3rd. July 11th.
I'd like to bring up July 11 IP6 on taxi cabs and look for council support to take the staff's recommendation. I was compelled by the memo that we don't need that requirement anymore,
Yep.
and there's,
Yep.
Agree?
okay.
Yeah. So a majority? Yeah, great, great. I will mention, and I don't know which IP it is, but it's the pending work session on July 11th. So August 6th, we will be hearing about our $3.75 million that was awarded to us by HUD, or the Pro Housing Award, and that is promoting and reducing obstacles to housing, is essentially what that stands for. So excited about that, and we'll also be hearing from our Harvard Fellow that is actually here, Bloomberg Harvard Fellow that is here, and looking forward to that update from her on August 6th.
I'd like to gauge council support for a pending work session item for food insecurity in the community. No immediate urgency or anything like that, but I'd like to have a discussion on what the situation is with that sometime.
Maybe that's good joint entities.
Could be good joint entities, yeah.
Yeah,
that
I
would
like
be-
that a lot.
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
Agree.
All right, so we will make sure that our next joint entities meeting, we have food insecurities as a part of that. I know that so in our late handout, well, that was probably our clarification of agenda items. But if I may, just throw this in. So in our late handouts, we did get a letter from, and they were also here today, Escucha Mi Voz. I'm wondering if council would be comfortable with the city manager office and maybe NDS reaching out to them just to kind of talk about the grant application that we sent. So they'll just have information about that. If people are okay with that. Certainly, Mayor Pro Tem and I, if you all are comfortable, can be a part of that. But are you all okay whether we are able to make that happen or not? Okay.
Mayor, the one thing I would add is there's a lot of requests that I heard as part of public comment tonight about steering all the money toward immigrants or immigrant groups. Of course, we can't discriminate based on national origin, and we would probably have to communicate that to them as well. Now, certainly, we have a lot of programs that benefit immigrants, but just we're not able to limit it to them.
Yeah.
That actually was a question I was going to email you. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
I mean, again, I think the hope is just to discuss with them what this, program, what the application is really to give information, the same information that's going to come August 6th, but I thought, potentially it would allow them, this one-on-one conversation to get facts from the staff on the application. Of course, things will come before the council for discussion and direction as well, but thought this might be one way just to have a conversation before we, at that request for this one particular item. So if council is okay with that, then we'll move forward with that. Okay.
I hesitate to say this is a pending work topic. It's almost like are we past that item?
No, I mean, we're still on July 11th with pending work items.
Okay, so pending work item, one thing I would like at some point, and I have to have some conversations, but I've talked to at least Councilor Dunn on this. We had a public comment from a downtown district employee, who was a bartender, I believe, and who talked about parking rates for employees in the downtown area. And I would be interested in gathering some information and then coming and maybe we can talk and to find out what staff might, if there's any discussions about collaborations or partnerships or something between the downtown district and parking to allow them a discounted rate for when they're working.
So this may be what you're talking about. We are actively working internally to evaluate a downtown district request for an evening parking permit. Right now, our parking permits are 24 hours, but some reduced hour permit, say like 4 or 5 o'clock through 2 or 3 in the morning, geared towards workers that could be at a reduced rate. So we're looking at that. We're
that was precisely
kind of evaluating whether our parking system can handle that
exactly,
by
but
the
just
hour.
to know that you're working on it is.
Yeah, it might require LPRs though. Sorry, too soon.
I was just going to say, who thought that parking could be like this hotbed of contention? But no, that's wonderful to know, and that basically takes care of what I wanted to kind of see if we could get.
Yeah, we're
initiated.
working
So,
on
thank
that.
you.
So, yeah.
So you're withdrawing the work session
I am.
option? Okay.
And it would require an ordinance change. At least that's our initial thought. So it would come to you eventually.
Okay.
Any other comments on July 11th or past agenda items? Okay. We're going to move on to item number 6. Oh, wait a minute. I know. So honestly, I did speak to them before the meeting. I have one question for the council when it comes down to the work session agenda.
Put them up top. Put them up top.
Yes.
Yes.
Are we okay with kind of shifting USG towards the top? And
Yes.
and I am also wondering if council would be okay with me moving clarification and information packets toward the top.
Yes.
People are okay with that?
That was quick.
Okay. All right. Now, welcome, USG.
Thank you guys kindly for being able to consider that. I was going to ask selfishly anyways. Before I start with my announcements, I'm going to briefly turn it over to Director Amin to introduce herself.
Hi, you guys. I've
Hello.
met some of you. I was at the HUD grant ceremony a few weeks ago. I actually interned for the assistant secretary that presented the city with the check, so that was a cool full circle moment. But my name's Anna Amin. I'm a student at the university, rising senior. If you ever met Keaton Zeman, he was my predecessor. I'm the new Keaton this year, the director of government relations, which I was really excited about until I realized what this year is politically, and then I was like, wow, I really did that to myself. So my job, as most of you know, is to set the legislative agenda at the local, state, and the federal level. I'm also the new director of legislative affairs for the Association of Big Ten Students. So I have the very fun job of figuring out what legislation 600,000 students, like applies to 600,000 students and what we should all focus on. And so it'll be a busy year. I just kind of want to let you know what direction USG will be taking at these 3 different levels. We're trying to focus on civic engagement and education. Matthew will talk a little bit in his final point about I really want to educate our students and our residents on what the parking increases will pay for and what they'll cover. I don't think a lot of people know what they'll cover. Not that that will make them feel any different about having to pay more to park, but information for people our age is good because we notice that, particularly being in USG, that people tend to jump to conclusions, and giving them information is really helpful. So since USG is nonpartisan, we're really taking an educational approach. We'll probably be collaborating with you guys on some like voter civic engagement education things, just so that we can make sure that our students who are residents for 4 years here in Iowa City are as educated as possible. But yeah, I will be meeting with some of you. I know I'll be meeting with Jeff and Kirk soon to talk about what your legislative agenda is. Students are residents here for 4 years, sometimes more. It's important that the city and the university collaborate. I also think it helps Des Moines take us a little more seriously when we can say, well, this is not just our initiative, it's also the city's. So hoping to do some more collaboration with you guys. I don't know if I'll be at another city council meeting since it's 10 o'clock. I can't swing that every other Tuesday, but hoping to work with you guys soon. Nice to meet you all.
Great. Yes.
Yay for USG visibility. All right, so first on the announcements. So per our Director of Sustainability, CANBUS, or the university's free busing system, applied for a grant from the Federal Transit Administration called the Low to Zero Emission Grant. CANBUS was one of 62 applicants, and we were awarded $16.4 million, which will go towards 6 electric buses and a new maintenance facility building that will start construction in 2025. 80% of CANBUSes are beyond their lifespan, so this will help us start revitalizing our fleet. USG is proud to see the impact of CANBUS in Iowa City every day, and this is a huge accomplishment for us. I give all credit to Director Marco Morell, who championed this initiative, and USG is so proud of all of his work. Given the recent Iowa Supreme Court ruling on abortion, USG has released a statement that reads, in part, USG calls on the Iowa legislature to allow such a vital issue to be decided through a statewide referendum, with polls conducted by the Des Moines Register having shown that over 60% of Iowans believe that access to safe abortion should be legal. We believe that the Supreme Court's decision undermines the will of the people of Iowa. A referendum on the ballot would allow Iowans to take their voices to the polls and protect the reproductive rights that the Supreme Court has violated. The full statement is available on our website and on our Instagram at UIowaStudentGov. And then third point, and kind of what Director Amin said earlier, unsurprisingly, the fee increases for students living here over the summer has not been received very well amongst many others in our community. While USG does not have an official statement on parking, the city liaisons plan to do a social media informational post to better inform our new Hawkeyes, as well as students returning in the fall, about the city's reasoning and justification for this motion. We aim to help students understand and reduce any shock value that might be associated with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Yes. All right. And the last item is number 7, council updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committees.
We had an excellent Economic Development Committee meeting.
All right.
That we did.
All right. We are adjourned. Have a good night.
Good morning, Moz.
Yes.
A minute
Yeah.
at a time.
Have a good night, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you.
Yeah.